Hey guys, Steve from PC Budget Solutions here, and changing it up a little bit. So, quick backstory for you guys. A friend of mine who I built a computer for a little over 3 years ago called me up and she says, I think it's time to do some overhauling. Computer's acting a little funny. So, I get the computer in, do some testing. Turns out it's really just Windows. But some of her stuff's a little bit dated. So, she has a Core i7 3770K. 32 gigabytes of RAM. She actually upgraded from the 16 I originally put in there, but she has a GTX 770 and a smaller SSD. So, once I got everything done, I said, let's go ahead and upgrade. So, we threw in an RX 580, and we threw in a 240 gig SSD, and I redid everything. So, welcome guys to episode 2 of Is It Worth It? And today we're going to take a look at a card that cost $400 3 years ago versus a card that cost $200 in 2017. So let's take the GTX 770 versus the RX 580. So let's take a look at the test bench. Now, you're going to ask, where's Ryzen at? Here's the thing. This is her computer. This is a computer that a lot of you may already have. You may have a GTX 760, 770, 780 from 2013. And we don't want to do a complete overhaul. That's going to cost us $1,500. Let's just take a look at the sys we have and let's see if this is really worth it. So we got the 7700K 3.9 gigahertz basic overclock, 32 gigabytes of memory, Hyper 212 Evo and push-pull. Motherboard's okay. I really couldn't get much more than like 441. I felt comfortable with 3.9, so I kept it there. Got the 240 gig SSD, got a good power supply and running Windows 10 Home 64-bit. Let's take a look at the two cards we're testing. So here we have the Gigabyte GTX 770 WindForce 3 versus the PowerColor RX 580. The main difference here is the 8 gigabytes of GDDR5 versus the 2 gigabytes of GDDR5, and about 800 more stream processors versus CUDA cores. The rest of the specs look relatively similar, with the big difference being that the RX 580 is running on the 14 nanometer process, running the Polaris architecture, and the GTX 770 is running on the older Kepler architecture on the 28 nanometer process. So that is the hidden difference between the two cards. Now, let's take a look at Rise of the Tomb Raider and see how those differences actually affect real-world performance. So, this is the test methodology I work with. It's the same as every other test I do. 4 Chrome tabs open, nothing like running like YouTube. YouTube's open, but nothing's running. I'm running HW Monitor, MSI Afterburner, CPU-Z, GPU-Z, and a respective game launcher. So just a stereotypical load that most people would have. So let's take a look at the RX 580. I did 1080p and 1440p. 1080p, it won, honestly, quite a bit. Not quite 50% 1080p, closer to 30 to 40%. At 1440p, that's where it really had the 50% gain versus the GTX 770. Definitely going to be a GPU bottleneck there. So let's keep going. As you guys know, Ashes of the Singularity doesn't really agree with me. I can run a 1080p and a 1440p test 6 times and I could get staggering results. But this one came back pretty good. Consistently at 1080p, the RX 580 was in the low 60s and a 1440p upper 50s. So I was happy with that. The GTX 770 performed actually what I really expected, which was pretty good at 1080p, somewhere around 50% behind. But at 1440p, it wasn't even half. It was 60, 70, 80% behind. So no surprise there, being a brand new game on the market. The GTX 770 just can't keep up in this regard. So far it's looking like this has been a very good investment for my friend. So For Honor produced very similar results that I was expecting. Nearly 120 FPS at 1080p preset. The GTX 770 actually performed very, very, very well in this benchmark and the next one. Apparently, from my testing, even though I exceeded the 2 gigabyte limit, I noticed I was using far more system memory, upwards of a gig, than what I was before. And despite the memory being slower and having higher latency than GDDR5, it didn't bottleneck it nearly as much as it did in some other games. As you see here, 83 FPS at 1080p and 47 FPS at 1440p, which I wouldn't say is playable, but I'm also using a high preset, so you could turn it down a little bit and get some better results. The RX 580 obviously performed exactly where I expected it to be, and that it falls in line with my other tests as well. So the last one on chopping block is Ghost Recon Wildlands, and then we're going to wrap this one up. This benchmark is what really showed me what was going on. I actually did For Honor first before, or after Ghost Recon Wildlands rather. So to give you the backstory, even at 1080p high preset, I was exceeding 2 gigabytes of VRAM, but this is where I saw my system memory went from about 3 gigabytes up to about 3.9 gigabytes. So I did some researching around and found out that what happened was the system memory was being used for storing textures for it to be rendered. Obviously, it caused a bottleneck even at 1080p and a big bottleneck at 1440p, but it actually was able to do it. This is actually kind of surprising, so I learned something from this. But the results still seem clear. Basically, we're looking at a 50% performance increase at 1080p and anywhere from, a 50 to 75% performance increase at 1440p. So the story stayed the same the entire time. So let's go ahead, let's wrap this up, and let's talk about all we learned today. So we learned a fair bit today. If you take the benchmarks from this system compared to my Ryzen system, what you'll find out is Intel hasn't really done a lot the last couple years. So fortunately for my friend, we didn't have to invest a lot of money in her rig to keep it going, probably for another 2, maybe 3 years. I might be pushing it. But that'll give her 6, maybe 7 years before we do just a complete rebuild, which is pretty good for a computer. There's no doubt that the RX 580 is a fantastic value buy. It's not the top of the line. The GTX 1070 arguably is also a really good value of mid to low 300s. And if you have that kind of money to spend, buy that card. But at, mid to low 200s, I'm running at a 1440p 144 hertz. GTA 5 rarely dips below like 55 FPS. So it's a fantastic card to buy. And I think in this video, you guys have found out that for a couple $100, basically an SSD upgrade and a graphics card, you can continue the lifespan of a computer that, was high-end maybe 3.5, 4 years ago, and you don't want to do a whole new rig, and you don't want to drop $500, $600 on a graphics card that you can get by for a couple more years down the road. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to episode 2 of Is It Worth It? This episode, it was worth it. The last episode, unfortunately, was not. But if you liked the video, liked it. If you didn't like it, it's cool. Hit that dislike button now. Give me some good feedback. Everything used in this video, for the most part, can be found in the link in the description below. But this is Steve from PC Budget Solutions, and I'll see you guys later on down the road.